the tractor cab wiring harness. This is the same chassis cable for both the Cruiser and the Viper Pro. So this is initially where life becomes exactly the same. So if we look up here, what we have is a pretty generic harness, except for it has 6 leads on it. So 3 ground, 3 power. So with that, one thing I always want to make sure everyone remembers and is clear on is that we would request this to be hooked to 1 battery. And it's for the simple fact of making sure we're eliminating air. And I guess why that's brought up is in the past years here, we've had a few systems turned into 24-volt systems due to connecting to multiple batteries. So with that, we do have basic operation, but we generally lose a node or 2 of the actual operation. Sometimes it's hard to actually find what's happened. And with that, I just want to make sure everyone knows and understands that the easiest way to rule that out is simply connect it to 1 battery. So, so this is the main chassis cable for both the Cruiser and the Viper Pro. So off of the main connections, off a battery, we have a high current fuse, which is 15 amp, and a logic fuse, which is 10 amp. And then this is where here it goes off and it tees off to the actual cab cable. Now, it's the cab cable it'll break out into the actual what's called a console cable. So before I go there, I want to point out that there's a remote switch. So when we have both the Cruiser or the Viper Pro, you have a little 3-pin Deutsch that looks exactly like this. This remote switch has a wire that's labeled remote switch. So all of our wiring is labeled, so it's very clear. It is an orange and white wire, so when you turn the opener pressure on with the foot pedal on the Cruiser or with the opener pressure switch down on the Viper Pro, it will supply us 12-volt power there, and at that point you can turn on another device with it. So it does supply 12-volt power at 5 amps. So we would then, of course, if you're operating in anything more, you're activating a relay, and then that's keeping it separate between the units. So that's where you can link them in with cruisers and stuff operating third-party tanks to make it so the foot pedal switch activates everything all together, both opener pressure, all 3 opener pressure, field mapping, and their carts. So if you look at page 54, it shows you the actual main chassis cable along the bottom. So one other thing I want to point out, if we flip back to page 53, it has the same chassis cable. So that is the exact same cable. So initially on the actual Cruiser monitor, the chassis cable then goes to the console cable, and the console cable then plugs into the back of that monitor. So that Cruiser monitor is a small monitor like what you see here. It has just a small light console cable that goes with it. Another part that goes along with that, if you're looking in the manual, it has the 2 plugs that plug into the back of it there. It also has one other thing that goes along with it, which is a simple Raven GPS puck. So same as like a Garmin style, it's for picking up basically for speed is what we're using it for. So that is supplied along with the Cruiser, and that gives us the ability then to put speed into the actual monitor, and it's a necessary evil to have speed go into the actual Cruiser, and that's for operating things like packing pressure, to make sure that it knows how to correct and how fast it needs to correct. So it's for information through the node that it requires it for the actual packing pressure, and so that's why we do supply it with a small GPS pickup for actually picking up speed. So I want to make sure you guys do know that the supplied GPS antenna is required to be hooked up for speed with that. So if you ever have any questions with that, it is here within your actual manuals. Now if you flip over to page 54, utilizing that same chassis cable, we then have the actual Viper cabling that goes along with that. So from there, it's simple. It's just a console cable that's changed, and it goes up into the actual back of the monitor, where you can see then it has the actual connections that plug into the back of the monitor, some into the switch box, and then from there to the GPS receiver. So this is required to actually hook up with your customer's GPS. So at that point, it gives you the port GPS receiver, DGPS. So it's labeled as that. It's simply right off the console cable. Mine's a little hard to see, but I got a cable linking out of it so that we can put some speed into that Viper for you tomorrow. So we went through these breakdowns here already. I just wanted to show you a little clearer on this Viper Pro here. It's got two main plugs. They simply plug into the very back of that control, and then from there we have three more that are down here, which are circled. Those are the ones that are plugging into the back of the switch box. That switch box is a required node when we power it up, so you'll see that later tomorrow. And when we follow that cable, that console cable down, it gives us that GPS, which I already pointed out. There's a few other plugs that it labeled we do not use, but with that, we had someone ask, could you add the weather station to it so that you had it? Of course you can. So there's options of things like weather station that can be added on there. One other port that I do want to point out on there is labeled a little more clearly in your actual manual on that page 54. It does have a port to power up this Slingshot field hub, which at that point it has a little cable off of there, again Deutsch connection, labeled off as modem power or field hub. So it's something that we needed to make sure as we add these options on there, there's always a place to grab that power. So when you power up the Viper, it'll actually power up the modem for remote service. And as we learn more about Slingshot tomorrow, it'll show you what some of the other options are. But the key one for us is remote service. I also put this slide up because it's not included with your actual manual there, of where the foot pedal switch is incorporated into that cruiser monitor. So that's where that foot pedal switch that operates both the opener pressure and your field mapping, and when you're tied into the actual remote switch there, that's where it connects and activates all three of those options of opener pressure, field mapping, and third-party carts.